I was 28 years old when I heard the words that would scar me forever. My father's voice, cold and merciless, cut through the air like broken glass. "You're dead to us. We don't have a daughter anymore." Before I go on, if you've ever felt abandoned by the very people who should have protected you, I want you to stay with me until the end of this story. And if you can, subscribe to the channel. Because here, we don't run from the truth. We face it together. That night, everything I thought I knew about family shattered. The argument had started the same way it always did, with disappointment hanging in the air like smoke. My parents had a script for my life, and by 28 I had strayed too far from it. I was supposed to stay small, obedient, tied to their expectations. But instead, I chose independence. I still remember the scene vividly. The kitchen carried the smell of garlic and stew, familiar, almost comforting, but there was no warmth left in that house. My father sat like a judge, heavy and immovable at the table, while my mother hovered in silence behind him, her approval of his judgment clear in every gesture. There weren't many words exchanged because words weren't really needed. Their disappointment was louder than anything they could say. My choice to live on my own, to pursue design instead of the family business, was treated like a betrayal. My refusal to bend had turned me into a stranger under their roof. Then came the sentence, the one that ended everything. My father's declaration wasn't loud, but it was final. My mother nodded without protest, sealing my fate with her silence. I felt my body go numb. I looked down at the tablecloth with its faded flower prints, the same one that had been there since my childhood. I thought of birthday candles, dinners after school, moments when I believed this home was mine. All of those memories turned to ash in an instant. I didn't argue, I didn't scream. I simply stood, my hands trembling, and walked toward the door. The silence behind me was deafening. Neither of them tried to stop me, not even for a goodbye. That was the night I left their house for the last time. I stepped out with nothing but a small suitcase, and the hollow echo of their words still in my chest. It was the death of the daughter they claimed to have lost, and the beginning of a woman they would never truly know. The night I left my parents' house, the city felt both endless and suffocating. I carried a single suitcase, heavy, not with clothes, but with the weight of rejection. The streetlights blurred in my eyes as I walked, unsure of where I was going. I had no plan, no savings, and no one waiting for me. All I had was the certainty that I couldn't go back. The first weeks were the hardest. I slept on the couch of a classmate who barely knew me. Her kindness was temporary, though, and I felt the unspoken pressure of overstaying my welcome. Soon, I began drifting between places, sometimes with acquaintances, sometimes with co-workers from the cafe where I found a job. Nights became a blur of borrowed blankets and ceilings that weren't mine. During the day, I worked long shifts behind the counter, serving coffee to strangers who didn't know that I hadn't eaten breakfast, or that I was silently calculating how many more days I could afford the bus fare. The cafe smelled of roasted beans and burnt milk, but to me, it smelled like survival. Every coin I earned went into a small envelope tucked inside my suitcase. My goal was simple: find a space of my own, no matter how small. There were moments of quiet despair. I remember standing in front of a grocery store once, staring at the fruit I couldn't afford, pretending to browse so no one would notice I had no money. I learned to stretch every meal, to sip water when hunger ached too deeply, to swallow my pride when life felt unbearable. But there was also resilience. In those silent battles, I discovered a strength I didn't know I had. I would sit on park benches with a notebook in my lap, sketching designs, building dreams out of thin lines and fading ink. Those sketches became my anchor, the proof that even though I had nothing, I was still creating, still alive. What hurt the most wasn't the hunger or the instability. It was the loneliness. I had friends, yes, but no one who felt permanent. At night, when the city quieted, and the only sound was the hum of traffic in the distance, I would lie awake, wondering if my parents ever thought of me. Did they miss me, even secretly? Or had they erased me completely, just as they had promised?
Weeks turned into months. I saved enough to rent a tiny room at the edge of the city. The walls were thin, the paint chipped, and the ceiling leaked when it rained, but it was mine. For the first time, I closed a door and knew no one could take it from me. I slept on a mattress on the floor, listening to the rain drip into a bucket, and yet I felt freer than I ever had under my parents' roof. That broken room was the first brick in the foundation of my new life. I didn't know where the path would lead, but I knew one thing: I had survived. The room I rented at the edge of the city was falling apart, but to me, it was a kingdom. The peeling paint and leaky ceiling were nothing compared to the freedom I felt each night as I turned the key, knowing it was mine. For the first time, I could close a door and not fear someone telling me I didn't belong. I still worked long hours at the cafe. The shifts were grueling. Early mornings that blurred into late evenings, the smell of burnt espresso clinging to my clothes. But inside that endless routine, something began to change. I carried a small notebook in the pocket of my apron. During breaks, I filled its pages with sketches, posters, logos, even imaginary storefronts. At first, it was just a way to pass the time, to remind myself I still had dreams. But soon, it became more. One afternoon, while wiping down tables, a regular customer, a young woman with tired eyes and a laptop always open, noticed my notebook left carelessly on the counter. She flipped through the pages before I could snatch it away. Instead of mocking me, she smiled. "You did these?" she asked. I nodded, embarrassed, waiting for the laughter. But it never came. "They're good," she said softly. "You should be doing more of this." Her words stayed with me long after she left. For the first time since I walked out of my parents' house, someone saw me not as a failure, not as a runaway, but as an artist. Encouraged, I started searching for small design jobs online, flyers for student events, digital posters for local musicians, anything that paid a few dollars. Most nights, after dragging myself home from the cafe, I stayed up at my wobbly desk with nothing but a secondhand laptop and sheer determination. I worked until my eyes burned, teaching myself new skills, stumbling through mistakes, and learning by doing. It wasn't glamorous. My neighbors often fought through the thin walls, their arguments seeping into my concentration. My internet cut out regularly, and more than once I cried in frustration when I lost hours of work. But slowly, jobs started trickling in. A flyer here, a poster there. Nothing big, but enough to remind me I was building something. I kept the cafe job because I had to, but in those stolen hours at night, I felt alive. Each completed project was like planting a seed in soil I had once believed was barren. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell most people. This was mine alone, fragile but growing. Looking back, I see now that those were the years of shadows, working in silence, unseen, unnoticed. But in the dark, roots take hold. The girl who had walked out of her parents' house with a single suitcase was becoming someone new. Not a daughter they had disowned, but a woman who refused to vanish. And for the first time, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the future was mine to shape. There are moments in life that feel ordinary on the surface, but mark the turning point of an entire story. For me, that moment came when I turned the key and stepped into my very first apartment. I was still 28. The hallway outside smelled faintly of dust and cleaning solution, and the stairs creaked under my weight as I carried a single box into the empty space. The apartment itself was small, one room with a kitchenette tucked into the corner, a bathroom no larger than a closet, and windows that overlooked the brick wall of the neighboring building. To anyone else, it was nothing. But to me, it was freedom made solid, a home carved out of years of struggle. The floorboards were scratched, the walls needed paint, and the radiator clanked like an old machine struggling to breathe. Yet I couldn't stop smiling. For the first time since I was cast out of my parents' house, I was standing in a place that belonged to me. No borrowed couches, no awkward silences in someone else's living room, no fear of overstaying my welcome. This was mine. I remember sitting on the floor that first night with nothing but a blanket and a plastic bag of groceries, bread, peanut butter, a carton of milk. I ate in silence, the hum of the refrigerator filling the room. It wasn't luxury, but it was victory. The walls echoed with emptiness, but in that silence, I felt powerful. At work in the cafe, my coworkers joked about my shoebox apartment. They didn't understand, and I didn't explain. They didn't know what it meant to finally shut a door and know no one could throw me out. No one could tell me I didn't belong. That small key resting on my palm was worth more than any inheritance my parents had ever promised. The nights were still long, of course. I worked late shifts, came home exhausted, and forced myself to design through the fatigue. But now I had a desk, a rickety one I found at a thrift store. I placed my laptop there, and suddenly the apartment felt alive. My sketches began covering the walls, taped up in crooked rows like trophies of survival. There were nights when the loneliness crept back, pressing on my chest until I struggled to breathe. I would sit by the window, staring at the brick wall across from me, wondering if my parents ever thought about me. Did they pass by my old bedroom at home and pause? Or had they erased me completely as if I had never existed? But even in those moments of doubt, I knew I had crossed a threshold. This apartment wasn't just shelter, it was proof. Proof that I had walked out with nothing and still managed to stand on my own 2 feet. It was in that empty room, with its scratched floor and chipped paint, that I whispered to myself for the first time, I'm not dead. I'm alive. And I'm just getting started. It had been nearly 4 years since I last saw them. 4 years since I'd walked out of their house with a suitcase, and their words, "You're dead to us," burning in my ears. In those years, I built a fragile kind of peace. My apartment, though modest, had become a sanctuary. The walls were lined with my sketches, my desk cluttered with projects, and each night I felt the quiet pride of knowing I had survived. That evening started like any other. I had just returned from the cafe, my hands smelling faintly of coffee and bleach. I slipped off my shoes, set my bag down, and was about to sit at my desk when a knock echoed through the apartment. At first, I thought it was a neighbor. I wasn't expecting anyone. But when I opened the door, the past came flooding back in one single crushing instant. There they were, my parents, standing in the dim light of the hallway, suitcases at their sides. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. My chest tightened, and my throat went dry. My father looked older, his hair thinner, his frame heavier. My mother's face was tired, though her eyes carried the same sharpness I remembered. They stared at me as if no time had passed, as if the years of silence were just a pause in conversation. I didn't move. I didn't speak. My body froze, the weight of 4 years collapsing into that single moment. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "We need a place to stay," he said flatly, as though he were asking me to pass the salt at dinner. "We've had difficulties. Your mother and I will stay here until things settle." The audacity of it struck me like a blow. These were the people who had erased me, who had stripped me of the title of daughter, who had told me I was nothing to them. And yet, here they stood, suitcases packed, ready to step into the life I had built without them. My mother spoke next, her voice clipped and cold. "This is not the time for arguments. We're family. You have space. We'll manage." Family. The word twisted in my gut. For years, I had begged for that word to mean something, to hold me, to protect me. They had thrown it away like garbage. And now, when they needed me, they dared to pick it back up and wield it like a weapon. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My heart pounded in my chest. Part of me wanted to scream, to slam the door in their faces, to demand they leave me in peace. Another part of me, the old daughter who once craved their approval, hesitated. The silence stretched. My father shifted impatiently, as though waiting for me to simply step aside. My mother adjusted her coat, her expression unreadable but expectant. That night, the ghosts of my past had returned, not as memories, but as flesh and blood, carrying their baggage straight to my doorstep. And in that moment, I realized survival had been one battle, but facing them again would be another war entirely. The silence between us stretched so long that I could hear the ticking of the old clock on my wall. My parents stood in the doorway with their suitcases, looking less like strangers than invaders. I could almost feel the weight of their presence pressing against the threshold of my apartment, threatening to smother the fragile peace I had built here. My father was the first to break the silence. His tone carried no question, no humility, only command. "We'll stay here until we get back on our feet," he said, already lifting his suitcase as if he had the right to step inside. Something in me tightened. The old instinct to obey, to surrender, rose up like a shadow, but I forced it back down. I gripped the edge of the door, my knuckles white, as if holding on to my freedom itself. My mother followed, her words sharp and unyielding. "You have enough space. You live here alone, don't you? We're your parents. It's only natural." Natural. The word struck me like a bitter joke. What was natural about being told I was dead to them? What was natural about being cast out of their lives, only to have them show up years later demanding shelter? Inside my chest, my heart pounded so loudly I thought they might hear it. My voice trembled when I finally spoke. "You can't stay here. This is my home." My father's eyes narrowed, the familiar steel returning to his gaze. "Don't be ridiculous. You owe us this much. After everything we gave you, you have the nerve to say no?" And there it was, the manipulation, the rewriting of history. They spoke as if the years of abandonment had never happened, as if their cruelty could be erased by the convenience of their need. I wanted to scream, to throw their words back at them, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. My voice came out low, steady, almost foreign to my own ears. "You told me I was dead to you. Those were your words, not mine. You buried me. And now you show up expecting me to open my door?" For a flicker of a second, I thought I saw doubt flash across my mother's face, but it vanished quickly, replaced with icy defiance. "We were angry, families fight, but blood is blood. You cannot deny us now." Her words carved into me, because once I would have believed them. Once I would have begged for any scrap of belonging. But standing in my own apartment, I realized that their blood did not define me. My survival, my struggle, my independence, that was what defined me now. I held my ground, though my hands trembled. "This is not your home," I said finally, "and I am not your daughter anymore. You made that choice long ago." The hallway grew colder. My father's jaw clenched, his hand tightening around the suitcase handle. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. They looked at me as though I were a stranger, and perhaps that was the truth. They didn't step inside. Not yet. But I knew the battle was far from over. That night, I understood something terrifying. Sometimes, the hardest war is not with the past itself, but with the people who refuse to let it go. The air in the hallway grew heavier with every passing second. My parents didn't move their suitcases, but neither did they step back. It was as though we were locked in a silent standoff, the doorway between us turning into a battlefield. My father finally broke the silence, his voice rising with the same thunder I remembered from my childhood. "After everything we sacrificed for you, this is how you repay us? By shutting us out when we need you most?" The words hit me like a wave. But this time I didn't sink. I had heard these accusations before, thrown like weapons every time I had dared to dream outside their plans. But now, in my own apartment, I recognized them for what they were: manipulation dressed as love. My mother's voice followed, sharper than his, like a blade cutting through the air. "You are ungrateful. You spit on the blood that made you. Do you think strangers will stand by you when you fall? Number-only family does that. And here you are, betraying us, betraying your own blood." The words stung, not because they were true, but because I had once believed them. For so many years, I clung to the idea that family was sacred, that I owed them loyalty no matter how deeply they hurt me. But staring at their faces now, I realized blood had not saved me. Blood had abandoned me. My voice came out hoarse, but steady. "You erased me when it was convenient. You told me I was dead to you. And now you come back, not because you love me, but because you need what I've built without you." My father scoffed, his face twisting with anger. "Listen to yourself. Arrogant, selfish, everything we feared you'd become. You think this little apartment makes you powerful? You think surviving without us makes you better than us?" For a moment, my hands trembled at my sides. The old daughter inside me, the one who once longed for their approval, wanted to crumble, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness even though I had done nothing wrong. But another part of me, the woman who had fought for every coin, every meal, every hour of freedom, rose stronger. I took a deep breath. My heart was racing, but my words were calm. "This apartment doesn't make me better. It makes me free. And freedom is something you never gave me." My mother's eyes narrowed, cold as stone. "You'll regret this. One day, you'll see you turned your back on the only people who ever truly mattered." Her words burned, but I didn't let them in. I looked at both of them, at the suitcases they gripped like weapons, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see parents. I saw two people who had chosen control over love, pride over compassion. With my hand on the door, I felt the weight of the choice pressing down on me. To open meant surrender, to close meant war, and in that frozen moment, I knew this was the decision that would define the rest of my life. My hand rested on the door, the cool metal of the handle grounding me in the middle of the storm. On one side stood the people who had given me life but denied me love. On the other was the apartment I had built from nothing, the fragile sanctuary that represented every hour of work, every tear shed in silence, every step toward freedom. My father's voice thundered again, demanding obedience. "We're not leaving. You owe us this much. Do you hear me? We are your parents." The word parents rolled over me like poison. Parents protect. Parents guide. Parents do not bury their children with words like, "You're dead to us." The ones standing in front of me were not parents. They were strangers who had once shared my blood. For a heartbeat, my old self, the daughter who once begged for approval, rose up inside me, trembling. I could almost hear her whisper, "If you let them in, maybe they'll love you again. Maybe they'll see your worth." But another voice, louder, steadier, answered back. "They only came because they need what you have, not because they love you, not because they miss you." I swallowed hard, my chest aching. My words came out soft, but unshakable. "You told me I was dead to you. I believed you. I mourned it. I rebuilt myself from the ashes of that night. And now, you don't get to walk back into my life just because it suits you." My mother's face twisted with fury. "Ungrateful, selfish, heartless, you are nothing without us." Her words pierced me, but instead of bleeding, I burned. Because I knew the truth. I had been nothing with them. Only away from them had I learned what it meant to live. I straightened my shoulders, my hand tightening on the door. My father took a step forward, suitcase in hand, his glare daring me to stop him. For a moment, I feared he would force his way inside. But I stood my ground, my voice shaking yet firm. "This is my home. You don't belong here, not anymore." The silence that followed was unbearable. My parents stared at me as though I had betrayed some sacred code, as though I had broken the unbreakable. And maybe I had, but it was a chain, not a bond. I closed the door, slowly, firmly, until their faces disappeared behind it, and only the faint echo of their anger lingered in the hallway. The click of the lock echoed through my chest like thunder. On the other side, they pounded once, twice. I heard my father's muffled curse, my mother's hiss of rage. Then silence. Their footsteps receded, dragging their luggage down the hall, fading into nothing. I leaned against the door, my body shaking as the weight of what I'd done crashed over me. Tears streamed down my face, hot and unrelenting. It hurt. God, it hurt to choose myself over them. But beneath the pain, there was something else. Relief. For the first time in my life, I had chosen me. And that was a beginning worth every scar. When the echo of their footsteps finally disappeared down the hallway, silence filled my apartment. It wasn't the ordinary kind of silence, the one that comes late at night when the city hums faintly in the background. This silence was heavy, pressing against my chest, sinking into my bones. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the floor, my arms wrapped around my knees. My body shook from head to toe, trembling with adrenaline, fear, and something far more dangerous: relief. Tears spilled freely down my cheeks, soaking into my sweater. For years I had dreamed of standing up to them, of finally saying the words I had swallowed as a child, and now that it had happened, I felt hollow, like I had torn open a wound that would take a lifetime to close. Before I go further, if you've ever had to cut ties with someone you thought you couldn't live without, I want you to stay with me. And if this story resonates with you, subscribe to the channel. Because stories like these are never just mine. They belong to all of us who've been forced to choose ourselves. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on my mattress, listening to the radiator hiss and the city groan beyond the windows. My parents' faces replayed in my mind over and over. My father's narrowed eyes, my mother's cold disapproval. Their words echoed too, ungrateful, selfish, heartless. They had always known which words would cut the deepest. But beneath the ache, something new was growing, a quiet defiance, a whisper that said, "You survived them once. You can survive them again." The days that followed were strange. My apartment, once a sanctuary, felt haunted. I kept expecting a knock on the door, another confrontation. Every creak in the hallway made my heart jump. I even considered moving, packing up my life and running again. But then I stopped myself. I had spent too many years running, from their house, from their judgment, from the shadow of their control. I refused to run anymore. So I stayed. I cleaned the apartment obsessively, as if scrubbing the floors and dusting the shelves could erase the memory of them standing in my doorway. I filled the walls with new sketches, designs brighter, bolder, almost angry in their colors. Creation became my way of reclaiming the space. At work, no one noticed the change in me. I smiled when I served coffee, laughed politely at jokes, nodded when customers complained. But inside, I carried a storm. Sometimes I caught myself staring at families who came into the cafe, parents with their children, chatting casually, laughing together. I wondered if those children knew how fragile it all was, how easily the people you trust most could turn into strangers. Nights were the hardest. Loneliness pressed on me like a second skin. I thought about calling them, apologizing just to make the ache stop. The temptation was sharp, pulling at me like a hook. But then I remembered my mother's voice, "You're dead to us," and the image of her standing in my doorway, suitcase in hand, demanding entry as if nothing had happened. That memory kept me steady. Instead of calling them, I began writing. Not letters to send, but words to release. I filled notebooks with confessions, with the things I never had the courage to say out loud. Some nights I wrote until dawn, my fingers aching, my eyes burning. Slowly, the pages piled up. Slowly, I felt lighter. In those pages, I discovered something important. I wasn't writing for them. I was writing for me. For the girl who had once believed she was unworthy of love. For the young woman who had carried a suitcase through the city streets, convinced she had no one. For the woman I was becoming. Scarred, yes, but unbroken. Weeks passed. The fear of their return faded, replaced by a new kind of awareness. I realized I had been living my life in reaction to them, fleeing when they pushed, hardening when they attacked, shrinking when they demanded. But with the door closed and locked behind them, I began to wonder, who was I without their shadow? That question both terrified and thrilled me, so I tested it. I said yes to a freelance project that once would have scared me. I presented my work to a client without apologizing for every detail. I stopped hiding my sketches, instead pinning them proudly on my walls. And when the paycheck came, enough to cover rent without the cafe tips, I cried. Not from fear this time, but from pride. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was beginning to live. Still, healing wasn't linear. There were nights when their voices came back to me in dreams, sharp as knives. There were mornings when I woke up heavy with doubt, wondering if I had truly done the right thing. The grief of losing a family doesn't vanish. It lingers. It gnaws. It resurfaces when you least expect it. But each time the doubt came, I returned to the moment at the door. I remembered the strength it took to close it, the finality of the lock clicking into place. That sound became my anchor, my reminder that I had chosen myself. And slowly, the apartment transformed again. No longer haunted, no longer heavy. It became mine in a new way, not just a place of survival, but a space of becoming. I painted one of the walls a deep shade of blue, filled the shelves with secondhand books, and bought a plant that somehow managed to stay alive despite my neglect. Every little addition was a declaration. I am still here. I am still building. Now, when I think of family, I no longer think of the people who shut me out. I think of the friends who stayed after long shifts, listening when I needed to cry. I think of the mentor who gave me my first real design project. I think of neighbors who waved good morning, reminding me I wasn't invisible. Family, I realized, could be chosen. And maybe that choice mattered more than blood ever would. That was the lesson hidden in the silence after the storm. That peace isn't given, it's created. That freedom comes with loss, but also with possibility. And that sometimes, the only way to save yourself is to close the door and never look back. I was no longer the girl they declared dead. I was alive, painfully, beautifully alive. And for the first time, I was beginning to write my own story. It has been years since that night when I closed the door on my parents. The sound of the lock clicking still echoes in my memory, sharp, final, and strangely liberating. That single act defined everything that came after. I had chosen myself over the chains of blood, and though the journey since has not been easy, it has been mine. Entirely mine. In the beginning, the days after their departure were filled with silence. I felt like a ghost in my own home, pacing the floors, replaying their words, wondering if I had made a mistake. But with time, I realized the silence wasn't empty. It was space. Space I had never been allowed before. Space to breathe, to dream, to create without fear of being judged or cast aside. And so I filled it. With sketches taped to the walls, with late-night work illuminated by the glow of my laptop, with secondhand furniture that carried no history but the one I gave it. Slowly, my apartment transformed from a place of survival into a place of growth. The cafe job became less of a burden and more of a stepping stone. I saved, I worked, I hustled. My design projects multiplied, little by little, until the envelopes of cash under my mattress were replaced by official checks with my name printed proudly on them. Every deposit was a reminder. I did this. Me. Alone. But the truth is, I wasn't entirely alone. Along the way, people appeared, unexpected, genuine, unbound by blood, but bound by choice. There was Clara, the customer who first believed in my sketches. She became my mentor, the one who recommended me to clients far bigger than I dared dream of. There was David, my coworker at the cafe, who stayed late helping me clean just so I wouldn't walk home alone. And then there were neighbors who brought me soup when I was sick, friends who showed up on birthdays with laughter and cheap wine, people who became the family my parents never were. That's when I realized something life-changing. Family isn't who shares your blood. Family is who shows up. Family is who stays when the world turns cold. Family is who reminds you that you are worthy of love, not because you owe them, but because you are alive. I didn't find that in the house I was born into. I found it in the life I built, in the people who chose me as much as I chose them. And in that choice, I was reborn. Now, before I go on, let me remind you of something important. If you've followed me through this story, if you've felt the weight of my pain, if you've recognized pieces of your own life in mine, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It may sound simple, but it means everything. Every like, every subscription tells me that these stories matter, that they're worth sharing, that voices like mine, and maybe like yours, deserve to be heard. So please, take a moment right now, click that button, and help me continue. It truly makes a difference. The years rolled on, and with them came victories I never thought possible. I left the cafe, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. It had been my first anchor, my first lesson in resilience. I opened my own studio, small but filled with light, where my sketches became designs that traveled far beyond the city I once walked with a single suitcase. There were setbacks, of course. Clients who doubted me, months when bills felt overwhelming, nights when fear whispered that I was still the same abandoned daughter. But each time I reminded myself, I closed that door. I chose myself. I will never go back. And as my career grew, so did I. I traveled for the first time, standing in airports with a passport in hand, marveling at the freedom I once thought I'd never have. I saw cities I had only sketched from imagination, ate meals that felt like celebrations, and carried pieces of the world back into my art. But no matter how far I went, my small apartment remained my sanctuary. It was no longer just a shelter. It was a symbol of everything I had endured and everything I had become. Sometimes I would sit by the window, watching the sun dip behind the brick wall across from me, and whisper to myself, "You are alive. You are free." I know some people will hear my story and judge me. They will say I abandoned my parents, that I should have forgiven, that blood should always win. But those people have never lived the reality of being erased by the very ones who gave them life. They have never stood at a doorway with the ghosts of betrayal demanding entry. Forgiveness is not the same as surrender. Love is not the same as obedience. And blood is not enough to bind people together. The truth is, I did forgive them, not for their sake, but for mine. I forgave so I could move forward, so I could live without the weight of bitterness dragging me down. But I never opened the door again. Forgiveness does not require re-entry. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting who they chose to be. And so I live, not as the daughter they declared dead, but as the woman who chose to live despite them. If you are listening to this, if you've stayed until the very end, let me say this: you are not alone. If your family has rejected you, if they've tried to control you, if they've used blood as a chain instead of a bond, you are not alone. You can survive. You can rebuild. You can choose yourself, and in doing so, you can find a new family, one built not on obligation, but on love. But before you go, please, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and leave a like. It's more than just a button. It's a way of standing together, of saying these stories matter. And I promise, there are more stories to tell, more lessons to share, more moments of survival and rebirth that might just help someone else. So hit that like, hit that subscribe, and stay with me. Because if there's one thing my life has taught me, it's this: survival is only the beginning. Rebirth, that's where the real story starts.